Esther, what's Burnham's first week been like?
It has been absolutely shambolic, one cock-up after another. The issue really with Starmer, how he was forced out at the end, really was about sleaze and it was about cronyism. Well, Andy Burnham has brought that back, convicted fraudster. He's brought sleaze, he's brought cronyism, and now he's brought hypocrisy into the centre of government.
Andy Burnham, Esther, wasted absolutely no time in purging Starmer loyalists.
Yes, and this, again, is going to come back and haunt him. I've been through a lot of reshuffles, but nothing like this. This was an embarrassment. He has already planted the seeds of his downfall.
Esther, a source said to me, "Hello and welcome to the Daily Expresso. Parliament is in recess, but our Westminster Whisperer, the Tory MP Esther McVey, has been there. Esther, what's Burnham's first week been like?"
Well, Andy Burnham, being Prime Minister for only a few days, it has been absolutely shambolic. He had his chaotic reshuffle and he's got these now new policy announcements unfunded. I will tell you, it's been one cock-up after another.
From a journalist's perspective, it has sometimes felt like amateur hour.
Yeah, you'll have to be careful with that because I see a name sticking, Amateur Andy, because he's done so many unnecessary errors, unforced errors, and he's also now got a lot of enemies that he didn't need to have as he purged the Starmer loyalists. And the issue really with Starmer, how he was forced out at the end, really was over Mandelson, and it was about sleaze and it was about cronyism. Well, Andy Burnham has brought that back into the centre of government from who he has appointed.
What was his worst appointment?
Louise Haigh, because she absolutely is sleaze, a convicted fraudster brought into the centre of government, and cronyism, because she was the one who had to stand down because of this conviction for fraud, and off she went out plotting to try and get Burnham the job. Remember, Starmer had only been in as Prime Minister for 1 year and she's out there plotting. So I think she has to be the worst of all of them. And then we've now had the latest appointment, Anna Sarwar, who was the leader of Labour up in Scotland. This is the man who said, I will never take on a peerage. I'm going to we need to get rid of the House of Lords. Oh my goodness, he's just taken that peerage, right? He's just come in as a minister from the Lords, as a trade minister, and this now is rank hypocrisy. So what has Burnham, in his first few days of being Prime Minister, he's brought sleaze, he's brought cronyism, and now he's brought hypocrisy into the centre of government.
And back to Louise Haigh, Starmer once said, you can't have a lawbreaker as a lawmaker.
Yeah, and that's really why we look at her appointment now as probably the most obscene of all of the appointments. And what has she got? She's got this massive power base. She's actually got 3 jobs in one. She's got 3 titles there. She's got First Secretary of State, which is basically Deputy Prime Minister. She's got Chancellor for the Duchy of Lancaster. Well, that's basically in charge of Whitehall. And she's got the Minister in the Cabinet Office. So she's got this massive power base.
She's the highest ranked minister.
Exactly right. And she's got all of this power. And I will say to you, Andy Burnham is storing up a lot of problems for himself. So she couldn't be trusted. She couldn't be trusted because she's got a fraud conviction that shows you can't be trusted. She couldn't be trusted because her first act was to go and plot against the Prime Minister in office, that was Starmer, and yet he has given to her all of this power.
And historically, some pretty significant people have held that role, including a certain Lord Peter Mandelson.
Right, so other people have had power before, and you've called them like super departments that they've had. So Mandelson has been powerful before. And remember, there's 3 jobs here. So he had the Cabinet Office and a Trade Secretary. And then you had John Prescott before, who was a Deputy Prime Minister, and then he had transport and sort of local government. So you've had other people with power before, but not all of this power residing in that one person. And if you look back at David Cameron, he separated out what would seem to be, the Duchy of Lancaster job and the first Secretary of State job, and he divided between Oliver Letwin, and then he had William Haigh in there. So you see that a division of power, but she has got it all, and I think that's going to cause a lot of problem. Historically, I'll tell you who had a lot of power, and that was Winston Churchill between 1940 and 1945. But obviously it was the war. He was the Prime Minister, and he gave himself also the Defence Secretary role. So yes, people have done that, but not somebody like her with her convictions.
And one thing that isn't in her portfolio is Public Sector Fraud Authority.
Yeah, now that obviously has been taken out. And why? Because she can't be trusted with it, because she'd have the oversight of sort of fraud within government. So she has had that removed from her, and it has now been moved into the Department of Work and Pensions. A bit of a conflict in a way there, yes. Obviously, I've been Secretary of State for the Department of Work and Pensions, and we would have had fraud, but you would have been looking at benefit fraud. This is a slightly different role there. But the other officers that she's got, Louise Haigh, she's now going to be looking at the number 10 of the North. She's now got the national infrastructure. She's now got sort of crucial national security. I'm not really sure. And I think we need to understand, why has she got all of these posts? And it's because he's paying her back for her disloyalty to Starmer, for her loyalty to him. And he's seeing her now as his. So Andy Burnham is seeing Louise Haigh as her Whitehall enforcer. She had a time as a Unite shop steward, but he's seeing her as the one who's going to drive through what he wants in Westminster and whilst he's Prime Minister.
Andy Burnham wasted absolutely no time in purging Starmer loyalists.
Yes, and this, again, is going to come back and haunt him because, yes, they were loyalists to Starmer, but equally, I would just say they were the loyalists to a Prime Minister. And the reason I'll tell you why that's so important, a Prime Minister only has his power base because people are loyal to him. So some of these will say, gosh, this was an unfair sacking. I was just loyal to who was our party leader, as we should be. Now, look, nobody's going to cry over David Lammy going. There will be cheers. I mean, he was not up to the job. He needed to go. And nobody will be crying over Lord Hermer being chucked out. He was no good at the job. I'm going to stop for a second on David Lammy because David Lammy has got the ego the size of a house. So I'm wondering, is there a grubby deal for Lammy there from Andy Burnham to keep him quiet on the backbenches? We don't know. But again, I wouldn't be surprised if it was. Other people he chucked out who were Starmer loyalists were people like Steve Reed, people like Peter Kyle. But the one name that we're going to linger on for a little bit is Darren Jones. Now, I'm not saying Darren Jones is a household name, but he actually was a real player, sort of newish, well, not that new, but newish in. He was in the Treasury for a period of time, Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Then he was moved to be Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister, an unusual post, but this was to support and back up Starmer. And why? Because he was a good performer on the floor of the House. Why? Because he took all of Starmer's difficult debates, everything about Peter Mandelson, and he was very much a straight bat, and he was very good on the floor of the House. So this man knows where all the skeletons lie. He knows where all the bodies are. So really, for Andy Burnham to get rid of him, I'd say a very stupid move.
And two things on this. Labour sources have told me that there's already plotting happening and a faction forming of those Starmer loyalists. But also, I've met Darren Jones. I've had lunch with him, and I was kind of impressed by him.
And I will be honest with you, all sides of the house were. I mean, when he ended up drawing the short straw pretty much on a daily basis towards the end of Starmer's tenure as he was doing the Mandelson debates, everybody would say, yes, he was good. He closed down the argument, as best as you could for like 2 hours standing on the floor of the House taking questions from everybody he did. So I think that was a sort of a major mistake there. I think the only things I've heard heard people say about him, which is true. They'll say, oh, he's smug and he's condescending. This is what the opposition people would say. Absolutely, there was an element of that, but still, he knew what he was doing.
Everything is digital now, isn't it? Your money, your photos, even your loyalty card at the coffee shop. So there's something quietly brilliant about owning one thing that isn't on a screen. Real gold bullion. The weight of it, the shine, it's just a lovely thing to hold. The Pure Gold Company, which was voted the UK's best gold broker, makes owning physical gold really simple. Tax-free gold coins from the Royal Mint with friendly one-to-one guidance from your first question to final delivery. There's no jargon, no pressure, no call centre queues. It's insured to your door or stored in a secure professional vault. So visit the Pure Gold Company today and tell them JJ sent you.
And he did issue the first body blow to Burnham over his first policy announcement, which was a VAT cut on electricity bills.
What did I say? He knows where all the bodies lie and he knows the skeletons. He was in the Treasury, so he knows what is funded and what was not. He came across and sort of straddled the two, but worked direct to Starmer. And the reason he was meant to have been brought out is because Starmer really wanted to have a better oversight on what was going on in Treasury, to really know what the Treasury officials were doing, as well as Rachel Reeves. So when Andy Burnham came out with this brilliant announcement, as he saw it, that he was going to reduce energy bills, Darren Jones straight away said, you can't, because where you're saying the money's coming from, which is digital ID, that was an unfunded policy. So you don't have the money there, which made Burnham look, big ideas, but does not know the detail. That was another failing of Starmer, if you remember. And I think this statement from Martin Lewis actually will be damning. And this was about this energy cut, which technically was going to give people £45 over the year. But he said, and he warned, most people won't feel much benefit from that £45. And if Burnham exhausts his political capital and billions in Treasury reserves on policies that yield negligible real-world relief, he risks permanently damaging his public standing in his early tenure. Well, we're saying that, aren't we?
And that was his first policy. The second one was a £2 cap on bus fares in England. And then today, the third policy, and there's also questions about how this one's funded, was business rate cuts for hospitality and pubs.
Yeah, well, the problem with all of them so far, they haven't been funded. Because if you remember the the £3 to £2 for the bus, they said, well, where's that coming from? And it was meant to be like foreign aid. And was it a grant? How are they going to do it? Where's the money coming from? Then totally unfunded for the energy release. And this one now for the business rates relief. Again, where is that being funded from? And then the other thing, he thought it was a great announcement for the hospitality sector. But they said, well, you don't seem to understand what you're doing here either, because Rachel Reeves hammered us last year because the relief that was there for COVID no longer is. So actually, we haven't had a relief. Our rates have gone up. So actually we're paying like 70% more in the hospitality. Hotels about 115% more. So you're 20% off actually isn't necessarily going to work for us. So again, he doesn't know the detail, Burnham. And equally, if this is a permanent, which is meant to be a permanent relief here on business rates, everybody says straight away, rents will go up. So again, he hasn't sorted that. He should have said a temporary relief, and then rates and rent on property wouldn't have gone up, but he hasn't done that. So again, he's making rookie mistakes, and we're only a couple of days into his premiership. And remember, he's also had this a homelessness announcement. That's another 340 million. Not meant to be quite a policy, a bit of a statement, but again, that sort of disappeared. People are asking questions, where's that money going to come from?
Moments ago, you mentioned a rookie mistake. This week, it feels like we've seen the start of the Labour wars. Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary, and Wes Streeting, the Defence Secretary, were caught in a hot mic moment.
Yes. And yes, that was stupid. And yes, it was insensitive. And yes, they were saying it was a moment when May had been speaking to Ken Clarke, and May being Theresa May and Ken Clarke. And she used to say, I'm locking them up. I'm in the Home Office and you're letting them out. You're in the Justice Office. But it was wrongly done, wrongly said at the wrong time. at a time where they have just brought in a new law, which is the Sentencing Act, which is seeing lots of people coming out of prison. So literally on the floor of the House, literally just before we broke up for summer recess, you'll remember people who'd been raped had got notices coming to them that people like the rapists were going to be let out of prison early, and we had been promised that the most serious offenders, the most heinous offenders, would not be getting early release. So this was the big hoo-ha just before recess, but now we discover terrible murderers are being let out of prison. And so at the same time they're joking there, we've got Lizzie Harper there as her husband, Andrew Harper, who'd been killed as a police officer, serving police officer. They were being let out of prison, and this was why it was a terrible moment what they did. But why, I will say, Starmer slapped down Shabana Mahmood, slapped down West Streeting, forced them to make an apology.
Which sounded very similar to one another's.
Which made you think that it wasn't their apology, which made you think straight away they were upset. And this is where he's already starting to get enemies, even with his own cabinet, because the slapdown was unnecessary. They should have been able to have said it was stupid, we shouldn't have done it, we were referring to something else. But instead, what does Andy Burnham do? Slaps them down publicly, makes them do that, and at the same time, on the hoof, not knowing what he's talking about, says, I'm now, and I think you've got, what were his exact words?
I have his words. He says, I've spoken to the new Justice Secretary. He will review the policy together and make further statements in due course.
Right. So again, massive sort of people pleaser here, bends with the wind what he's talking about. Straight away thinks, oh, what am I going to do? I want to please people. I'll slap down my ministers. Then he says, oh, I'm going to change this law. But he doesn't change the law. He's too weak to change the law because he says, I'm now going to do a review into it. He could have changed the law. If he had been a bold leader and he'd really thought about what he was going to do, he would have said straight away, because you're not being released, these people aren't being released until September. So he could have straight away said, what I'm going to do is delay the commencement dates. That means nobody will be released yet, because that was an executive order he and the Secretary of State could have done. Well, he hasn't done that. What were his words? I'm going to do a review. I'm going to think about it. He's already lacking as a leader, doesn't know, wants to say things to please people and isn't doing anything. The other thing he could have done was he could have done a statutory instrument, and that was define who could not be let out early. And he could have said then murderers, he could have said rapists, he could have said various things, and he could have done that. He has done neither. And then the third thing, which would have been reversing the act altogether, which I tried to do, I laid 34 amendments down. My Sentencing Act is a disaster. That would need a change of law in Parliament. But what's he going to do there? He's going to make 400 of his MPs look stupid, because 400 of his MPs voted for that literally a couple of weeks ago. And they've defended it. Like I said to you, those rapists, people who'd been in like rape gang inquiries had got the letter to find out those rapists were letting out. And they defended that on the floor of the House literally 3 weeks ago. So Andy Burnham doesn't know what he's doing, Burnham. Amateur Andy, whatever we want to call him, had not thought that through.
And I want to touch on something you said. You said one of Burnham's problems was that he's a people pleaser. Well, yes, he's also trying to appease the public. Let me tell you what someone said to me just yesterday. These are 4 new messages that Burnham's team have come up with to try sell his message to the public. 1 is Britain believing in itself again. 2 is Britain better off. 3 is room to breathe. And 4 is power to communities. And I need to tell you, the source that told me this, didn't even know what any of that meant. So how's the public going to know what that means?
But haven't we seen this? His vacuous speeches so far have been hope in everybody's heart, has been growth in every postcode. Nobody's known what the Scooby-Doo, any of that means. And he's sending out more messages. So people are saying, oh, he'll have a bounce in the polls. He'll have a Burnham bounce. Yes, he will. because actually the British public will want him to do better. They're relieved they got rid of Starmer. So they're like, oh, crikey, yes. And they'll listen to this, motherhood and apple pie statements of, great wonderfulness for everybody. Let's all believe in ourselves. The world's going to be a better place. And that can sound, well, it doesn't sound great to me. But anyway, for some people that will sound great, but it will only be for a short space of time. And then when people say, oh, can you explain that to me? And he can't, hence he never took any questions for anybody, you included, when he gave his big speech in Manchester. People said, but we don't know what you stand for or you believe in. And so now, I'd love to see the polls next week when they see what a disaster he's been so far, both with the sort of reshuffles, with his announcements, them being unfunded, them not making any sense, what he should do and what he should do for Lizzie Harper. Yes, he should have stopped it happening in September. Yes, he should have taken out various murders and killers, exempted them from early release, but he hasn't. So people are now going to say, oh, doesn't know the detail, doesn't know what he's talking about, can't fund it, making enemies already, has put sleazy cronies back into government, hypocrites into government. The polls next week, I think that Burnham bounce is going to be disappearing.
It's interesting. One poll does seem to have him ahead, interestingly, more popular than Starmer ever was in the polls. But there, you just mentioned cronyism and who he's got near him. You were once in the top rung of government. What's that process like when you get called up to Downing Street in a reshuffle?
Well, reshuffles are usually done in military sort of precision, very organised. So if I go back to sort of David Cameron, his reshuffle would have been in his first one, 2012. 50 people were reshuffled and he did it in 36 hours. Michael Gove was meant to have moved in with him into Downing Street 2 weeks before to get it spot on. So it should be very organised, very polished. The media will get hints, tips, who they think's going to get a job. You as a minister you as an MP might think you're going to get a job. I got the phone call. You get the phone call. It's from a withheld number. That's number 10. Switchboard calling you. You must get to number 10 for a certain amount of time. I never knew what job I was going to get until I was in the room. And in the room, there's only 3 people. That was me. On this instance, it was David Cameron. It was his chief of staff, Ed Llewellyn. So if there's any leaks from that room, right, there's not many
That's
of you
where
there.
it's coming from.
Right, so you wouldn't know. In stark contrast, Andy Burnham's, it was as if it had been drawn up on the back of a fag packet and they didn't know what was going on. It was 90 minutes late to start. It went on and on into the night. There seemed to be arguing between posts. And this is where it, again, went horribly wrong. So walking into number 10 was Shabana Mahmood, Ed Miliband, and Louise Haigh. And this seems to be, because there was a 90-minute delay, a real power play, a real power struggle. Who was going to be Chancellor? Everybody thought it was either Shabana Mahmood, it was going to be Ed Miliband, going to be the Chancellor. Beth Rigby was more or less apoplectic on air because she thought she knew it, and it wasn't. Supposedly they'd all fallen out, and then Louise Haigh sort of played the ultimate power battle, said, well, we're not going to have John Healey instead. So this, to me, is a disaster. The only other time I can think of arguing going on, and maybe Theresa May is more akin in a way to Andy Burnham, because Theresa May has just come in after David Cameron. David Cameron was the first sort of Conservative Prime Minister in a coalition after a long period of a Labour government. And with Theresa May, it was Jeremy Hunt who argued, saying, I want to remain in health. And that was roughly it. And with good reason. He'd been there for years and years and wanted to finish off what his policies were. So there was a little bit of a delay there. Straight away, Justin Greening went in, said, I don't want to move from education. She'd seen Jeremy Hunt argue to stay in health. She thought she'd do the same thing. Theresa May was having none of it. Justin Greening then disappeared for 2 hours in number 10 and didn't come out. I then walked in. I'm thinking, oh, hooray, I'm going to get education education because you see the way it's stacked up.
Yeah.
Who's walked in, who's walked out, who's got a job. I pretty much went in with Damien Hines. Anyway, Damien Hines got education and I went back into the Department of Work and Pensions, and that was the job going to go to Justine Greening, and Justine Greening ended up sort of without. So it doesn't always work to do that power play, but it still wasn't as shambolic as Burnham's. Everything went wrong. Rachel Reeves, first of all, they thought she was offered defence. Then they think, oh no, she was offered education. They all were like, no, we're not having it. We're not happy. I've never seen anything like it. And I've been through a lot of reshuffles. I've been through Cameron's reshuffles. I've been through May's reshuffles and given a job. I've been through Boris Johnson's reshuffles. And I've been through Rishi Sunak's reshuffles. Got a job every time. Lost one under Boris. But nothing like this. This was an embarrassment.
Even from a journalist perspective, we weren't... The two names on everyone's lips was Shabana and Ed Miliband for Chancellor. And then there goes John Healey walking in first. So what's he like?
Again, this shows the weakness of Burnham. It also shows he doesn't have control over his cabinet ministers. It shows really they're not allies there, that they could argue between them, and then in the end he has to feel that he brings in John Healey. So I'm saying there's a lot of problems growing there, and that's why I said the slap down of Shabana Mahmood and Wes Streeting over that hot white mic moment was a problem, and he's now causing enemies within cabinet because they wouldn't have liked that. But we've already seen Shabana Mahmood's her own woman. He couldn't work out what he was doing with her. She stayed in her power base in the Home Office. She'll start gathering fans. At the same time, out of cabinet, we now know, and his title already is the official leader of opposition within the Labour Party is Darren Jones. So all of this is bubbling up, and none of it is looking good for Andy Burnham. He just doesn't know it yet. So I'm told he's still riding high on his he's just high on life at the moment, high on his new job. And he hasn't. He has already planted the seeds of his downfall.
Well, if that's only been the first few days, imagine what's still to come. And who knows how long to come for.
And I will also say, everybody thinks John Healey is a safe pair of hands. And he is. That was probably one of his best appointments. But what people haven't looked at already is John Healey, he voted for taxes to go up. He wanted them to go up to 50%. John Healey has also campaigned for more benefits. Remember, John Healey walked away because he didn't have enough money for defence. So he might not be the safe pair of hands. He could also be somebody who wants more and more money. So I think John Healey, although he's been given this job as to support Burnham, he might not be the sensible hands that the city, the markets, the country need. And watch out, because where we started at the beginning of this, I told you how good Darren Jones was. I don't think I told you as well, the city actually have more faith in his figures and his numbers than they do in what number 10 are saying. So already you can see the wheels are caught falling off. I'll call it the Burnham bus. Not only did, and again, that's at the very beginning. He couldn't fund, or doesn't know exactly how the funding of the bus. So the wheels on Burnham's bus are not going round and round. He's got a puncture and they're falling off.
Oh, if only we had a crystal ball list, if only. But thank you so much for joining us once again in studio. And thank you so much to you at home. Please do like, share, subscribe, and hit the hype button. We'll be back soon.
Right, a quick pause in the podcast to tell you about our sponsor, Incogni. You had those phone calls from numbers you don't recognise, or you go in your inbox and there's emails for stuff you did not sign up for. Well, that's because someone somewhere is selling your private information. That's where today's sponsor comes in. Incogni. They will contact these people who have been taking your information, and they'll say, oi, stop, delete it. Go to the website, incogni.com, you type in the details, 2 minutes later, Incogni are sorting it out for you automatically. And because I love you, I've got you a discount. It ain't 10%, it ain't 20%, 60% off. 60% off an annual Incogni plan. Just go to incogni.com/daily expresso or click the link in the episode description box below.